Mr. Levine, does the state wish to give an opening statement?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It was a Sunday evening, September 8th of last year, in Auburndale, Florida. And it was at that time that the defendant viciously and savagely unleashed his full fury and hatred towards his mother upon her, when he stabbed her with such force that the knife went shooting through her neck muscles, through her esophagus, through her trachea, through her thyroid cartilage, and shot out the other side of her neck. You will hear and see that as this happened, she began to bleed, and bleed profusely through the huge gash in her neck. While she bled, the defendant was there and watched as the blood came out of the huge hole in her neck. You're going to hear that he was there as he watched the blood and the life drain from her body until she took her final breath and was officially dead. You're also going to hear that this was exactly what the defendant meant to do, and that this is exactly what the defendant had thought about doing and had wanted to do for quite some time. So much so that he told multiple people, including multiple Charlotte County Sheriff's Office deputies and his own grandfather, the father of the defendant's mother, Collin Griffith. His name's Robert Willantis. You're going to hear from him. He'll fly in from New Mexico, and he'll tell you about those haunting statements that the defendant made. And you're going to see that exactly what the defendant said he wanted to do and said that he would do, he accomplished on the night of September 8th of last year. But how did Collin Griffith get there, bleeding out on her mother's kitchen floor? In order to understand that, we're going to have to take a step back and take a walk through some time. So you're going to see, of course, not just what happened on and around September 7th and September 8th, some of the critical time leading up to the murder, but you're also going to see and hear how this all began. Now, we're going to take a trip back to February 14th of 2023, the year prior to the defendant killing his mom. At that time, the defendant lived in Oklahoma. And you're going to hear on February 14th of 2023, the defendant killed somebody else when he shot that person 2 times. He shot that person in the chest, and he shot that person in the head. You're going to hear that it was undisputed that he shot that person, that he was arrested for that killing, and that he has not been charged to this date. Now, after that killing, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant, as a little bit of time progressed, he moved back to Florida. He had been living with his dad for a number of years in Oklahoma, approximately 3 years or so. While he was living in Oklahoma with his dad, his mom lived in Florida, in some different places, but including Port Charlotte most recently. And you're going to hear that while the defendant lived with his dad, the mom, as any mom would, greatly missed her son. And she didn't get an opportunity for different reasons, including a very controlling dad that the defendant was living with. So Kathy Griffith basically didn't have much contact with her son, not because she didn't want to, but she would try to call him and talk to him, and it pained her greatly that her son was not with her. You're going to hear that there's another brother, an older brother. He really doesn't have much to do with this case, but nonetheless, there was an older brother who lived with his mom, Kathy, for a period of time before he moved out of the house when he was old enough. So, as the defendant moves to Florida, his mom wanted to make up for lost time. That was 3 years, 3 critical years of her life and his life when they didn't do mother-son things. They didn't spend time together. They didn't have all those opportunities that maybe other kids and other parents had. So Kathy, the defendant's mom, tried to make up for lost time. And she took her son on multiple vacations. They took cruises. They went to Disney World. They traveled out of the country. They went to Washington, D.C. And she spent all her time and affection and money on the defendant. That was her son. And that's who she had missed for all those years. Now, was Kathy Griffith the perfect parent? No. Was she the perfect person? No. But nobody is. But you're going to hear that she gave everything that she had, including her life, to try to take care of the defendant and spend as much time as she could with him, even at the cost of her life, which ultimately is what happened. Now, as the defendant and his mom lived in Charlotte County, in Port Charlotte, they lived in a house, a well-kept house. It was the two of them. And they did plenty of things together. Like I said, they went on vacations. They went to the movies. They hung out. It was just the two of them. So they had nothing but basically one-on-one time. And you're going to hear that Kathy Griffith, like any mom, expected certain things. These weren't off-the-wall, dictator-like things. These were simple things that she thought would be appropriate to teach her son about responsibility and respect. Chores, minimal chores, such as weed whack in the backyard, taking trash and food or candy out of his room, helping her around the house with whatever little odd jobs might happen. But you're going to see in here, the defendant wanted nothing of that. He didn't want to be inconvenienced. He didn't respect his mom. He didn't care about his mom. And wherever this deep-seated anger and hatred came from, it was real within him. And he told people about it. So as the days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, his anger, as you'll see, was building and building.
Judge, I'm going to object to this being argumentative.
As the time went on, you'll see that the mom had to deal with a lot of issues, including being attacked by her own son. You'll hear a little bit about the defendant being arrested at a certain point for domestic violence battery. He was a juvenile, as he still is a juvenile. And you'll hear that he was put on some probation. But in essence, he was not happy with his mom, so he took her down to the ground and stomped on her hand. But they continued to live together. The mom, you'll hear, was afraid of the defendant and what ultimately might happen to her. And she was afraid he would kill her. But she loved him. And you're going to hear that she wanted to be with him. And she was cognizant of the fact that when he turned 18, he was probably going to leave the house. And that would, for all intents and purposes, end that one-on-one time. And he would continue on with his life however he saw fit. So it wasn't like every day was chaos or bedlam in the house, but the defendant had issues, the mom had some issues, but they were working through them. Now, sometimes they would go to the movies together, sometimes there would be good days, and you're going to actually get to see kind of like an inside peek of some time on September 7th and September 8th, the day that the defendant killed his mom. You're going to see that in the form of Ring camera footage that Kathy had set up inside because she was so afraid of what her son might do to her. And you're going to see that there was cameras set up in different parts that basically captured the same or similar things, but you're going to get to see some footage from a kitchen camera that captures the kitchen as well as into the living room. So you're not going to have to sit through 48 hours or 72 hours of just nothing happening. But you're going to see some clips. So you can kind of tell what the vibe was on those last 2 days of Kathy's life. You're also going to get to be able to see the timeline as it continues. We talked a little bit about jury selection, about a timeline, because nothing happens in a vacuum. So as the defendant's living with his mom, he starts making these statements that he wants to kill his mom, and that if he has to go back to his mom, he's going to kill her or do her harm or do himself harm. And he tries to make accusations against his mom that you'll see she was never arrested for anything as it pertains to the defendant. But nonetheless, he starts telling detectives, he starts telling deputies. And so the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has different units, as does a lot of law enforcement agencies. And you'll hear that they took a proactive approach because they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the defendant, and they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the mom. So you'll hear that there were multiple deputies and detectives that would check in on the family, would check in on mom, would check in on the defendant. And their goal was to try to ensure that both parties got along, and that, of course, they lived long, happy lives together. It didn't work out that way, not from a lack of their trying. So as the year continues, the defendant, as I mentioned, got arrested for the domestic violence battery. He got Baker acted a time or two. And when he would be about to be released, he would make statements. Basically, he would say he didn't want to go with his mom. If he went with his mom, he was afraid of what might happen, of his anger, that he would kill his mom. He also made statements that he was afraid that she would do something to him. But the reoccurring theme that you will hear from the witnesses from the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office is that the defendant verbalized what he ultimately did, which is that he would kill his mom. You'll hear from one or more deputies that even asked him, well, how are you going to do that? And he specifically mentioned, sometimes he would mention different things, like shoot or stab, but a reoccurring theme was he would mention that he would stab his mom. So the intervention continued with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. They would talk to both Kathy on the phone, the defendant on the phone. They were accessible. They would call and check in. They would stop by the house and talk. And the defendant and his mom independently, they had the ability to call the deputies and the detectives as well. Now, 2024, around February 19th or so, around that time, or perhaps a little bit earlier, the defendant sent a text message. He had many communications with an attorney that was
I'm going to object based on we don't know if this is going to be admissible.
Approach.